Sir, I want to thank you for taking this responsibility, first of all. I think it's an enormous undertaking, and I like your attitude about how you're going to approach it and put your arms around things. And I see it, as I think you do, as an incredible opportunity to try something new here and extensive. And I'm particularly interested in the whole crowdsourcing aspect, or whatever you call crowdsourcing, on that and the benefit it might do for that. But first, let me start by asking you, there's been a lot of discussion here today about drilling down all the way from the federal money as it goes all the way down to the final subcontractor at the local level. And that's all been conversation relative to what the computer will show. What do you see as the board's responsibility for tracking the federal monies? How far down should the board drill? Just to the state level, to the municipal level, or beyond?
I would say that, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I want to go as far as we possibly can, both legally and I mean, if it's possible to get there. And if it's not, I mean, there's going to be a significant amount of auditing being done. And a federal auditor, for instance, can go all the way down, right, and we'll have the benefit of any report or any review that they do will be published on the website. So, you know, that's another way you get down to the lowest level.
So a state auditor or a city auditor's
Sure.
reports will be available to you to put
Right.
out there. Because
Right.
you're going to have to leverage your resources, I assume. You're not going to have the capacity to do all that.
There is no capacity to do all that. I think we have to be smart about how we deploy our resources. I think there's I need to use risk-based models that suggest that this kind of money is a little bit more risky than this kind of money and go over here first. So we have to be smart about it. We have to try to get out in front of it and not just wait for the inevitable to happen.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, this Congress for about 8 years was in a coma when it came to oversight or whatever. I'm a little bit amused about some of my colleagues now being so intense on it, but I hope they're serious about it as we go forward. I think part of the issue is going to be municipalities and states having capacity as well to do it. Do you have presently in your design of what's going on at the federal level the ability and the capacity to help train their people up to preventative sorts of measures, or do you need more resources or more legislation for that?
I think time will tell, but I'm definitely going to make that one of the first goals of the organization, to develop that capacity to train, to distribute best practices, to do everything we can for our partners, not only at the federal but the state and local level, to help them get on the front end of this money. And that, I think, is a major mandate of this board.
Do you see any substantial differences between the way that states and municipalities now have to report to the federal government with respect to non-recovery and reinvestment monies that are allocated to them, and with the recovery money itself?
I think there are. I think it could be argued fairly that there are some additional reporting requirements being imposed. Whether or not they're so burdensome that it clogs the system down, just time will tell. I'm sure we'll hear about it.
Did you have an opportunity to read Mr. Brito's testimony? The gentleman will be testifying on the second panel from George Mason University.
I did.
You did?
I did.
Okay. You did or did not? I'm sorry.
I did.
Okay, thank you. It's my hearing thing on this. I also think our microphones need some oversight here from time to time. You can't hear. Do you have any objection? Are you comfortable with doing the types of things he's recommending in terms of working with people that are into this type of activity and making the data as useful in format, web-friendly, machine-readable, aggregated, and standardized, and all of those things that he's talking about?
No, I have no problem with it at all. I'd love to sit down with him.
I agree. That's great, because I think if we can do that, and if you're willing to work in that direction, we have not only our resources, but theirs as well.
Right.
And I agree with you. I'm just going to close out with this. I agree with you. This could be a model for every government expenditure all the way down the line, where we get the eyes of all the citizens out there, and we get rid of the gotcha stuff. You know, where it's no longer going to be just like, gotcha, you're doing something wrong. Every company that spends money has people that are looking to do abuse, waste, and fraud. We wouldn't have the Wall Street situation going on that we had today if that weren't true. Every time there's government money expended, somebody's going to try it. Every time an individual has money, somebody's going to try it. And if we can get all the eyes on and get rid of the gotcha stuff, we can just have a good, active, joint effort here where citizens get involved and be on the front end of this. So I congratulate you again on your attitude for this. I wish you all the luck, and I look forward to working with you on the committee for this venture.
Thank
you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I recognize gentleman Van Hollen from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this series of hearings on oversight. As we know, we put oversight protections in the bill to create the oversight mechanisms, but obviously Congress has a very important role, as my colleague, Mr. Tierney, and you have said, and thank you for taking on this responsibility. I had a couple questions based on your experience in oversight generally, and one of them relates to whistleblower protections. The chairman of this committee and I, Mr. Platts, Mr. Braley, and others have been pushing for greater whistleblower protections at the federal, state, and local level. The bill we passed, the Economic Recovery Bill, does strengthen whistleblower protections at the state and local level. We have some protections already in place at the federal level, but we are trying to strengthen those. We thought it made sense as part of a bill that contained $790 billion in taxpayer money, some in the form of tax relief, obviously, but the other in investment, that we strengthen the ability of those federal employees on the front lines to report waste, fraud, or abuse if they see it without fear of reprisal, because you can't be everywhere. The inspector generals can't be everywhere. So I know you may not have seen the legislation, but just as a general rule, do you think it's important to ensure that federal employees and other public officials who see wrongdoing and are wanting and willing to come forward and report wrongdoing are protected against any kind of retaliation? And how important is that in the oversight?
I think it's very important, Congressman. And as I mentioned a little earlier, I've been somebody who has designed whistle protection programs within my organization. I have not been bashful when I've seen retaliation to go directly to the secretary. So my attitude basically is we normally learn a lot from whistleblowers. It strikes me that the transparency piece of this will result in many more whistleblowers than we normally see, and we have to be very careful not to send any bad messages out there. And so I'm going to be vigilant about that. And when I see it, I'm going to ask my, let's say it happened in the Department of Education, I'm going to make sure that the IG knows about it, and we'll work together to try to cut it off. I want people to come forward. Now, having said that, it's sometimes labor intensive to sift through the complaints and the concerns of whistleblowers to find that nugget, but that's a process, and people that know how to do that can be very helpful in this circumstance. I hope to hire some of those.
Thank you. The other area I wanted to ask you about had to do with procurement officers in the federal government, state, or local government. My view is even before the Economic Recovery Plan was passed, we were stretched very thin when it comes to federal procurement officers. You have one individual that has to oversee lots of contracts, and even the best trained and best intentioned individuals can have a difficult time monitoring all that, even to the point where we started contracting out the responsibility for overseeing contracts, which creates a whole host of conflict of interest problems and other issues. Do you think it's important, as we go through this process, to try and bring on more procurement officers at the federal level so they can ably and effectively deal with the huge increase in contracts?
Absolutely, and I think you're right. It's a major challenge to the capacity is just not there. I think around 9/11, we were doing $200 billion of contracts a year, and now we're doing $500 billion and not to mention anything about the stimulus funds, and yet the increase in procurement specialists has remained flat. So this puts the extra strain, that we obviously have to address. So the Act calls for the board to look into that matter, to publish a report at some point. But I know that the departments are aggressively looking for people, whether or not we'll find them or not. Ironically, the economy situation might help us find those kind of people, but there will never be enough to handle this kind of money.
Well, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I hope we can, as a committee, focus on that, because this was, as you know, a problem even before we had the additional funds from the stimulus package, economic recovery package, and that's only added to the burden. And as I said, you can have very qualified and well-intentioned people who just get more work than they can possibly follow in a responsible manner.
The gentleman raised a very good point, which I'm also very sensitive to as well, and we will be looking at it further. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gentleman, yield back.
Thank you.
Right. I yield now to the gentleman from California, Mr. Bilbray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, God bless you. You obviously been dropped right into, I guess it was like an old movie, The Volcano. Look, I'm at a great position. I didn't support the Bush administration's proposal to spend $1 trillion, and I didn't support this administration's action on, we have to vote on this up front. And as somebody who's been in government oversight since I was 25 in 1976, I think that we didn't do our due diligence. What was it, 9 hours from the time we saw it till we voted, started debating it. That means now we have to do due diligence. Now the oversight after the fact is going to be absolutely essential on this issue, and I hope we can work together in a bipartisan effort to make sure that we avoid the pitfalls with this legislation, as we're seeing today on the House floor with the Bush administration emergency spending that has created so much uproar among the taxpayers. I've got some questions to you. I just came from Oversight in Science and Technology. So basically, I've talked to the people that you'll be working with over at the other side. One of the things that have come, the chairman and I are really trying to work on and is to make sure this administration doesn't fall into the pitfalls that the previous administration did, the mistakes. One of the big things that have not been talked about yet that I think we're going to hear in future months, though we've talked about the contracts in Iraq to for-profit organizations and the abuses there. We have not even scratched the surface of what happened in Afghanistan, especially with nonprofits, and that nonprofits traditionally do not get the type of scrutiny and oversight that for-profits have had. My question to you is that when we get down this line, are we willing to concentrate and make sure that when we allocate monies to nonprofits, the oversight is as strict and diligent as we have hopefully done with for-profit contracts?
Well, as an IG, I would never have differentiated between the amount of oversight I gave to a nonprofit versus a profit company. So as I sit here today, I can't think of why we would want to be any less vigorous in monies going to nonprofits as to other entities.
Well, I'll give you one is the fact that we talk about cracking down and not giving contracts to those who are under criminal investigation where the business has at least been indicted or investigated, or the fact is for wrongdoing. And when it comes to a private company, I think there's been an outroar about that. But then we've got nonprofits, and I'll be very blunt with you. California, the organization called Acorn, is really under investigation for major voter problems and for certain criminal activity. How are we going to continue to move forward with contracting with nonprofits that are under criminal investigation, even though we would not do that with a private for-profit organization?
Well, without, addressing a specific company or organization, I think that, certainly in any sort of a risk model, somebody that had those kind of problems would rise to the top. And if you were going to allocate resources to look at the universe, you would focus in on something like that.
Okay, I only say this because I want to make sure we avoid that. And I just seen the mistakes that were made, people thinking, well, because they're a nonprofit, we make assumptions, and people are still pocketing money one way or the other. There is no physical barrier from that. Let me sort of shift around and get onto something I think the chairman would be more comfortable with. And it's a big concern. I just want to give you the heads up as you go down there, because we talked about it in science. When we're moving forward on this energy independence issue and this clean technology being tied into this, I hope you get your guys working for you to really take the time to touch base with the Energy Secretary and talk about what is really going to be energy independent and environmentally friendly technologies. I just want to say, for one, as somebody who comes from serving on the Air Resources Board in California, that there are a lot of people who are going to be proposing contracts with you to use this money to perpetuate technologies. And one of them that has been really touted in the past is the use of ethanol as a environmentally friendly fuel. And I would ask that you get your experts to look at the fact that Duke University just came out with a report that said, from a greenhouse point of view, it'd be better never to plant the crop at all than to grow ethanol, grow corn for ethanol. The other issue is the new Air Resources Board report, the #1 air pollution people in the world, that says that ethanol has no environmental benefit over regular gasoline. And I bring this up so that when these proposals come out, that we draw the line and say, wait a minute, this does not fall under greenhouse or green fuel. The only thing green about ethanol is the money being made about it. And I know those are harsh words, but it's absolutely essential that we don't keep following that line. And if I will remind you that even if we talk about cellulosic ethanol, there is not the market and ability to use the ethanol that is being produced today. Right now, the industry is asking EPA to waive the 10% maximum in our fuel stream, and the EPA is stopping it because of environmental and operational difficulties on that. So I just want to say there's great opportunity for genetically altered enzymes to produce true green fuels, but please put it up. You see ethanol, take a second look at it and says, even with all the political pressure we can get, we don't want to have to line up in front of the Science Committee or the Government Oversight Committee and said, why did you give these grants out for a technology that the experts in California, the experts in the universities are saying are not a green fuel? Is that understood?
I understand what you're saying. I think maybe that better is addressed to the EPA or the Energy Department. I'm not representing the administration here. I'm representing the board that oversights to prevent fraud or waste. And that's, you know, if it arises in that arena, we'll be very actively engaged.
And as a former mayor and council member, you sit like a council doing oversight to the city manager and the department heads, and that's why I want you to say that it is fraud and it is a waste if we take money that's specifically earmarked for green, clean fuels, and because we're not well informed, we end up sending money into a technology that is an environmental dead end and an economic disaster on the long run. So I just want to say that when he comes up there, now I'm being squeaky wheel, so later I don't come to you and say, why did you spend money on this when you had all these scientific people coming out saying that this was a bad track to go. And I just want to say there's some great environmental opportunities out there. I hate to see us waste $1 on a technology that is not environmentally friendly when there's all kinds of them lining up to do it. And I appreciate you allowing me to pontificate on this issue. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And just before we call in the gentlewoman from Washington, D.C., let me just say that, you know, investigate, you know, I don't have, you know, a big problem with that because, I mean, investigations happen all the time, you know. But I think that the one that I'm really having problems with, my good friend from California who we've worked on many issues together and worked together for a long time. But when we have situations where people have been debarred and they still get contracts, I mean, that's a problem. And then, of course, where you have the CEO of a company that's been convicted and then the companies still get contracts for the government. I mean, those are the areas I have problems. I don't feel uncomfortable if you say that somebody's being investigated. I mean, that happens all the time. So I just wanted to share that with you to let you know that that doesn't bother me, because I think that sometimes when that happens, then that means that the job is being done. And I think that, you know, you mentioned Acorn, you know, but, you know, I must admit that Acorn, you know, has done some great things in terms of voter registration and, of course, being involved in the community. So I just want to sort of share that with you. And, of course, many people feel that it's an organization that deserves support. But so I yield to the gentlewoman from Washington, D.C.
I thank the chairman for yielding. Just a word about the the ethanol, I'm not sure that that was directed to the right party. There's some of us who have a lot of trouble with the current source of ethanol because it has us eating gas, and there are food shortages all over the world because corn is being eaten. Is a food for in many places, and now it's out of reach. Whereas here, of course, it's been so plentiful that we've been willing to drive on it. So I'm not sure the IG can say until after the fact, perhaps, what's the right. And I certainly don't know what the right place is to look for biofuels. All I know is we got to look for some place other than corn. But my question really goes to what I'm sure are your responsibilities, because the Recovery Act does authorize, in fact, it caught my attention, that the Recovery Act in particular authorizes the IG to look at the contracts, the subcontracts, the grantees, and all of that that is done by local officials. It caught my eye because I see the Vice President telling people he's going to call them out. If he goes and he sees that people are building swimming pools and other things that nobody would expect stimulus money to be used for, but many programs, not just the stimulus money, many programs of the federal government get upwards of 50%, 80%. I mean, some get even that much, for example, for the Medicaid share. So I'd like to know if this is a new authority, or if the IGs always have access to such records of contractors and grantees and subcontractors, subcontractors who share in state and local funds.
I think the answer to that is IGs have always had the ability to follow the federal dollar to wherever it went. And to that extent, these are not new authorities.
Have you known that to be done by IGs?
Absolutely.
Can I ask you how you think this will be done, and whether this is beginning under this authority?
Well,
it looks like what the Congress wants here is something pretty systematic.
Well, I think that we had a discussion earlier about our need and just being smart about being redundant. So we don't want to be, 5 different entities showing up the same day to look at the same money. So
agreed.
We're going to have to be, in a mode where we leverage our resources, make sure that, there's a division of labor here that's appropriate between state, federal, and local. But the fact of the matter is, federal IGs have always had the ability to follow that money from its source down to its lowest level, and often do in audits or investigations.
Yeah, well, we'd certainly like to find it before the newspapers do, so thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I now yield to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Spear.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Sir, I just read a story about you that was quite flattering, about how over many years you uncovered a lot of fraud, I guess in the Department of Interior, and it went unabated, I guess, is a good word to describe it. And eventually you left, is that correct?
Actually, I've been in the fraud field for 28, 29 years. I started in the Secret Service, and eventually I was in charge of all of fraud for the Secret Service. And then I went into EPA and ran their criminal program, and then I've been an IG for 10 years, and fraud has always been a part of the portfolio and is always present when there's money around.
I guess my question is, at some point were you frustrated where action wasn't being taken on issues that you had uncovered, and if so, to make sure that doesn't happen again, what do we need to make sure is in place, whether it's more whistleblower protection, more subpoena power, what do we need to do based on your previous experience where some of your efforts to uncover fraud were not addressed?
I don't think that I was hampered in any way by not having the tools to uncover fraud. Sometimes, on occasion, at the Department of Interior, when I would uncover misbehavior, whether there was fraud or any other kind of misbehavior, I became frustrated and, quite frankly, rather noisy about my frustration. And got the attention of the appropriate people, and eventually things happened. But sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes it's necessary to have a congressional hearing and have an IG come in and talk about what he's uncovered, and then have the department officials come as well as sort of the second panel. So I don't think there's a lack of tools. I think IGs have the tools. I think this act gives them the appropriate amount of money. We never have enough, I suppose, but a good chunk of money to do oversight. And they've set about smartly to get this done. And I'm very impressed with their willingness to try to get on the front end of the pipeline and prevent fraud, as opposed to simply waiting for the inevitable and going and detecting it.
In the financial services arena, we saw a lot of bad actors in the subprime market, and recently had a hearing in which we found that in the Federal Housing Administration, many of those bad actors had just moved over to provide FHA loans, and the directorate of FHA said he just didn't have the resources at the time to preclude them from participating. Now, we have since put language into one of our bills that we've moved this year to address that, but I guess my question is, when you have a volume of bad actors out there, they've done business with the federal government, we found out they were bad actors. Many of them are in a position where they just change the name of their company, come right back to try and do business with us. Do we have a database of bad actors out there that we can rely on? Should we have one? Could you comment on that?
Well, most departments, as you probably know, have suspension and debarment programs, and they get put on a list. But, you know, it's been my experience that people who commit fraud sort of follow the money, and there's no doubt in my mind that with this amount of money on the table, they will come. The challenge for all of us is to leverage our resources in a way that allows us to get at the fraud that will undoubtedly occur. I view the transparency piece of this act as a big help to investigative bodies, because we're going to have hundreds of millions of eyes and ears that we don't currently have in the traditional process. So we're undoubtedly going to hear more from citizens about fraud, or reporters that they've uncovered fraud by looking at the website and by understanding that that contract does belong to somebody's brother, and tell us about it than we would under the traditional way, which is we sort of stumble upon it, or we go out and we find a small amount of it.
Well, I would agree with you, and I think the transparency in this process is unlike any transparency we've seen ever, and it should be that transparent because it's so much money. So I just commend you. I just want to, as one member, to suggest that if it's time to raise the red flags, whether you need more resources or you believe a hearing would be helpful, that you call upon us so that we can be helpful to you. I yield back.
Thank you very much. We now yield to the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll attempt to be brief. Mr. Devaney, the RAT Board's website is supposed to provide a means for the public to provide feedback on the performance of contracts relating to the stimulus funds. Can you explain whether there will be transparency on the actual public feedback itself?
Well, we don't actually have control of the website yet, but when we do, we will be looking at the comments that come in, and I suspect we will have a process which involves perhaps not providing, notification of all the feedback we've gotten, because I think I mentioned earlier we're getting 3,900 hits a second on this website. So, but we will have a process where if we see a systemic problem that's developing, I'm going to want to be very proactive about getting that out there so that you know, not only my fellow IGs and colleagues at the state and local level know about it, but so the citizens can see that that's becoming a problem and that we're addressing it.
Well, let me ask you about the what the states, local communities, and independent organizations, are they aware that, you know, that the Recovery Act put emphasis on targeting this money towards economically distressed communities, and it also put some emphasis on involving small businesses? I mean, are these communities and states aware of that, or how will they be apprised of the emphasis that the Act puts on economically distressed communities and small business?
Congressman, I was asked that question earlier today, and I responded by saying that I'm not really fully aware of the of how the Act addresses that issue, and I would get back to that person. I'd be glad to include you in that response.
Okay. All right. Well, I thank you, and I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Let me just say this to Mr. Devaney before we conclude. Will you be able to report back to this committee within 2 weeks with a full report on both the initial set of stimulus contracts and an overview of the fraud prevention programs in place? Could you do that?
You know, I certainly heard that request at the beginning of the hearing, and as I've been thinking about it, I think the fraud prevention aspect of that is an easier response than the other one, and I would ask your indulgence. If I can't do it within 2 weeks, I'll let your staff know about it, and we can maybe work on that. The second one's a little bit more comprehensive. It's also one where we would have to go to the agencies themselves as opposed to just the IGs.
Right. Well, thank you. If you can, we appreciate that.
Thank you.
And let me just say that, you know, we're delighted that you are where you are. As I indicated early on, that everyone is saying that if it can be done and done properly, you can do it. So I want to let you know that whatever we can do here from this committee standpoint, we stand ready to do that. You know, if it's fight for more resources, you know, we stand ready to fight for more resources with you, because quite often that people in a position, you know, will not have the tools to be able to do the job that they're called upon to do. We want you to know that we stand with you to try and make certain that you have the resources, because we want to really deal with this whole waste, fraud, and abuse. As it was pointed out earlier, $55 billion, you know, wasted, you know, not going and doing what it's supposed to do. We want to assure you that we want to bring that number down, and we, with your help, I'm confident that we can bring it down. So thank you very, very much for your testimony, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you, sir.
Right. No further questions? Right. Thank you. We now call upon the second panel. Mr. William Holland, Auditor General of Illinois, is here on behalf of the National Association of State Auditors. Mr. David Gregan, Chief Procurement Officer for Washington, D.C., and is here on behalf of the National Association of State Procurement Officials. Welcome. Mr. Jerome Here. Mr. Jerome Hare is here, the Director of Audits for the County of Milwaukee, and is here on behalf of the Association of Local Government Auditors. Mr. Jerry Brito is Senior Research Fellow, of course, and we're delighted to have all of you here. And of course, what we would do is that, as you know, this committee, we swear everybody in. So we'd like for you to stand and raise your right hand. Agree to tell the truth and nothing but the truth? If so, let answer in the affirmative. Let the record reflect that all of them answered in the affirmative. So, Mr. Holland, we will begin with you. And as you know, that if you probably heard me say it, that you have 5 minutes to, and then after that, we will have a question and answer, and we just go right down the row. Thank you very much. Mr. Holland.
Thank you. Chairman Towns and Ranking Member Issa, who was maybe voting, and members of the committee, I'm pleased to be here today on behalf of the National Association of State Auditors, Comptrollers, and Treasurers to discuss oversight related to the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. While I may draw upon my experience as the state auditor in Illinois, I'm here to represent public servants and financial officials nationwide who take pride in ensuring that taxpayer dollars are monitored and used for their intended purposes. Accountability is always our #1 priority. However, the challenges of our current economy, coupled with the rapid spending authorized by the Recovery Act, am I a little too close? Too strong?
Yeah.
Pardon me, I didn't hear what you said. Let me go back. Accountability is always our #1 priority. However, the challenges of our current economy, coupled with the rapid spending authorized by the Recovery Act, make accountability more critical than at any other time in our government. Still a problem? No. We believe
Don't worry about it. We generally can't hear witnesses, but we hear you.
I'm sorry.
So
I
you can
apologize.
continue.
Okay. We believe accountability can be achieved by clearly defining responsibilities and coordinating the various participants. The Recovery Act and the initial implementing guidance issued by OMB specifically give federal departments and agencies, such as the Federal Inspector Generals, the GAO, and the Recovery Accountability and Transparency Board, primary responsibility for maintaining accountability over Recovery Act funds. Substantial dollars are appropriated to each of these entities for that singular purpose. The Recovery Act provides neither direct responsibility nor direct funds for oversight efforts at the state and local level. Nonetheless, management of these dollars, once they leave the federal government's hands, as well as the cost associated with that effort, is of utmost concern to our organization's members. State auditors already bear significant responsibility for oversight of federal spending programs by state agencies pursuant to the Single Audit Act and its amendments. These audits are generally conducted annually and provide assurance to the federal government as to the management and use of such funds by recipient states and their subrecipients. OMB's initial implementing guidance recognizes the importance of the single audit process in 2 key ways. First, in developing risk mitigation plans, federal departments and agencies are required to consider prior audit findings involving federal programs through which Recovery Act funds will be dispersed. And second, single audits are specifically identified in the guidance as an audit tool integral to promoting accountability over recovery grants. Clearly, the importance of the single audit process is magnified rather than minimized by the Recovery Act's emphasis on accountability. Nonetheless, during this period of rapid spending, there may be a desire at the national level to increase or alter some existing accountability processes. It will be important to define and communicate any changes in the single audit process in a timely and expeditious manner to the state audit community. We have been fortunate that both the GAO and OMB have been reaching out to the entire accountability community to discuss implementation of Recovery Act requirements. However, we are still uncertain as to our specific roles and what the cost and funding sources for fulfilling our roles will be. Staffing and other necessary resources in our offices throughout the nation are at an all-time low. Due to the influx of stimulus money to the states, fulfilling our single audit functions will certainly encompass more federal programs. This in turn will cause us to incur additional audit hours and perform more tests than in previous years. We believe the appropriated dollars would be better spent by the federal agencies on efforts to mitigate risk at the front end of the process. For instance, by conducting tests and reviewing prior audit findings to ensure that recipient agencies have a strong internal control process in place prior to their receipt and expenditure of Recovery Act funds. To the extent that Recovery Act funds flow through existing federal programs, these dollars will already be subject to audit in accordance with the Single Audit Act and OMB Circular 133. I should also note that financial officials other than the independent external auditor are very important to this discussion. Specifically, I'm referring to state controllers and treasurers that are responsible for the disbursement and reconciliation of funds. I can tell you that the controllers are very concerned about the reporting requirements and how that information will be gathered and reported. While much of the financial information is housed in the state's accounting system, some of the information is actually gathered at the state agency level. This dichotomy brings up concern regarding reconciliation. We wonder at the state level whether the federal government is going to require central state reporting directly to recovery.gov, individual state agency reporting directly to recovery.gov, or individual state agencies reporting to a federal agency, which is then responsible for assuring that the information is posted at recovery.gov. We await further guidance, timely and expeditious, from the federal government as to the regard of the reconciliation, as it will be extremely important. We stand ready to work with our federal counterparts to assure the most efficient and effective method for reporting is established. I should also point out the important role that internal auditors will play within individual agencies or at the statewide level in assuring that pre-disbursement internal controls are functioning properly and effectively. I'm happy to join here today with the chair of the Recovery Board and other important organizations. Individually and collectively, our groups have long been at the forefront of ensuring public accountability. In a talk at the White House Recovery and Reinvestment Act Implementation Conference last week, the President emphasized his commitment to accountability, and he said, if we see money being misspent, we will call it out. I can assure you that the accountability...
The light is on red. Will you sum up?
Oh, it did? I didn't see it. I was... You got to the end of my comments. Right. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just before we go to you, Mr. Gregan, I'd like to yield to the gentlewoman from New York for...
I thank the chairman for granting me a point of personal privilege. I am literally on the floor with Chairman Rangel with the AIG Accountability and Bonus Act that we have been working on all week. But I wanted to place my remarks in the record. Will send my questions to the individuals and compliment the leadership of our chairman and ranking member for a careful, sharp pencil and oversight on the recovery monies. Congratulations. Thank you. And I have to go back to the floor.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the gentlewoman for her support as well. Mr. Gregan.
Good afternoon, Chairman Towns, members of the committee. I'm David Gregan. I'm the Chief Procurement Officer of the City of Washington, D.C., and I'm also representing today the National Association of the State Procurement Officials, the organization of the 50 state procurement directors, as well as the City of Washington and the U.S. territories. We really thank you for this opportunity to comment on the role of the government procurement professional in preventing fraud, waste, and abuse in the implementation of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. It's our view that state chief procurement officers, or CPOs, are uniquely positioned to assist in the development of guidelines regarding use, timelines, and transparency of purchases we make as a result of this act. NASPO recognizes that the effectiveness of a state CPO is clearly linked to his or her ability to engage with policymakers at the highest levels in government, and that this engagement is critical to ensuring effective direction, coordination, and control over public expenditures. Additionally, state CPOs are charged with protecting all public funds from conflicts of interest, antitrust violations, fraud and abuse, and have already developed controls to address these concerns. Therefore, in order to proactively prevent fraud, waste, and abuse under the Recovery Act, it's imperative that central procurement be given the opportunity from the outset to help in developing strategies for properly spending stimulus funds. In your invitation to NASPO to participate in this hearing, the committee asks that we address 3 specific questions. First, what proactive steps are state procurement officials taking to prevent wasteful spending? It's imperative that we no longer wait for annual external audits to identify waste and fraud and abuse. Audit, in my opinion, is continuous. In DC, we post information about every purchase, including purchase card transactions, on a website for public scrutiny. And that's the sort of transparency that I believe that this act envisions and that we all as procurement professionals embrace. The eyes of the public are the most powerful tool against improper contracting behavior. In terms of developing specific safeguards and processes for stimulus funds, and in anticipation of these projects, NASPO members are developing and using a variety of strategies to aid their staff and customer agencies in spending the Act stimulus money efficiently, effectively, and most importantly, properly. Closer collaboration with our oversight partners in government, the auditors, the controllers, the inspectors general, that's number one among those tools that we are using right now. Communicating more aggressively. State central procurement offices must communicate guidance and expectations as well as best practices to user agencies and localities. Most states are issuing guidance to agency customers to promote uniformity of requests and reporting, while other states are creating data collection forms for customer agencies to help identify and track stimulus funds. Many of us are creating focused procurement teams, which we've done here in Washington, D.C., to ensure that the stimulus contracting, which is on a unique timeline for public procurement, is still effectively managed. We recognize that the need to aggressively and proactively search out the needs of our customers as opposed to waiting for a requisition is different from the way procurement professionals typically do business. And finally, early identification of appropriate existing contracts. CPOs are encouraging their staffs to identify viable, cooperative, and pre-established contracts for internal use. Cooperative purchasing is an effective tool and popular because it can save significant time with existing already competed contracts for those commonly used needs. Many of the stimulus funds, I think, will be spent on existing needs. Number two, you asked, what plans do states have for audit and investigations to identify and prosecute fraud in stimulus programs? As discussed in almost all of the opening remarks of this committee this morning, transparency is a cornerstone of the Act and is an essential element of procurement strategies to identify waste, fraud, and abuse. NASPO and its partner organizations are currently in discussions with OMB, with GAO, and related agencies to identify the recommended flow of information as it relates to Act reporting, and state CIOs are working closely with state CPOs and the stimulus teams to develop those reporting chains. The third question you asked was, what oversight challenges are state governments facing as we prepare to properly expend the stimulus funding? The overarching concern in central procurement and among the NASPO members, as well as NIGP, the National Contract Management Association, all professional procurement associations, is the rapidity with which we are expected to expend these funds. Generally, our concerns are related to the way we're going to manage data and the actual procurement operation. For data management, I'll be very brief. It's about knowing what information we need, when we need it, when and how to report it. That's already been brought up, and I won't belabor that. More importantly, the procurement operations. Government procurement typically does not respond well to compressed timelines. The process is built to be deliberative and methodical in seeking best value awards for every customer need. Our process was developed to deliver value while preventing fraud, waste, and abuse, and perhaps most importantly, to instill public confidence in the way that their money is being spent. Requiring states to perform to accelerated timelines and procedures countervails the fair, open, and transparent goals of the Act. The rapidity with which these funds must be contracted requires unprecedented communication, coordination, and standardization across state agencies and the central procurement offices. In conclusion, with this great opportunity for procurement directors, for all of the citizens to accomplish the mission that our President and the Congress have given us, I would make three final points. As procurement professionals, we must plan carefully, we must execute flawlessly, and we must do so in a manner that's respectful to the public trust. We cannot forget nor forego our responsibility to uphold the public integrity that's fundamental underpinning of government contracting. On behalf of NASPO, NIGP, NCMA, and all the other public procurement professional organizations, I want to thank you for holding this hearing and for inviting us to be part of this.
Thank you very much for your statement. Mr. Herr.
Congressman Towns, Chairman Towns. Chairman Towns, Congressman Bilbray. I'm honored to be here today as a founding member of the Association of Local Government Auditors, ALGA, to speak with you on behalf of ALGA and to give you a broad overview of local government's efforts to ensure accountability for the use of federal stimulus funds dispersed under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. But first, I'd like to say a little bit more about our organization. ALGA was founded in 1989 to support and strengthen local government auditing. We provide training and information sharing for members and assist local governments in establishing and maintaining independent audit functions. ALGA also provides a peer review program to assure the public that auditors meet professional standards. We currently comprise about 300 organizational members, representing more than 2,000 local government auditors in cities, counties, school districts, and authorities. Nearly 60% of our members are in the states that will be covered by the GAO in their longitudinal study of the long-range use of Recovery Act funds. ALGA is well positioned to coordinate with the GAO in its mandate to monitor local use of the funds, excuse me, because local government auditors possess in-depth knowledge of our operations, our organizations, and our management controls. To that end, we've recently sponsored a teleconference with Acting Comptroller General Gene Dodaro to discuss how the Recovery Act will affect local governments and to coordinate oversight efforts. We've also invited the GAO to speak at our annual conference for a more in-depth discussion of the role local government auditors will play as we move forward. We've been asked about proactive steps local officials are taking to prevent wasteful spending. Some of our member organizations have already started monitoring the requirements under the Act and communicating expectations to management. And some members are already providing fraud prevention training with special emphasis on federal requirements. But you should have some comfort in the notion that our existing oversight infrastructure will also be very helpful in providing assurance that the Recovery Act funds are well spent and that the process is indeed transparent. These include the Single Audit Act, the performance audits that we conduct, our hotlines, and our long-standing strong relationship with auditors at different levels of government. With regard to the Single Audit Act, due to the size and scope of the Recovery Act, we anticipate that much of the newly available federal assistance will indeed be subject to the single audit requirements. Our members either assist in conducting those audits or contract for them. As to performance audits, more than 80% of our members conduct performance audits, and these are designed to assess whether a program is achieving the intended benefits at a reasonable cost. But another important tool is our hotlines. Many local government audit organizations operate hotlines to receive information from vendors, employees, and the public about waste, fraud, and abuse. These audit organizations have established policies and procedures for investigating complaints and ultimately for referring cases for prosecution or other disciplinary action. We publicize our hotlines and we use them to vigorously pursue fraud in partnership with state and federal prosecutors. Another key strength is our coordination with auditors at different levels of government. Local government auditors interact with federal and state auditors in our work and through the National Intergovernmental Audit Forum and its 11 regional forums. The mission of the forums is to improve cooperation among its members, to enhance government accountability and transparency, and to increase the public trust. We were also asked to describe our plans for audits and investigations to identify and prosecute fraud and stimulus programs. Most of our member organizations have not yet scheduled specific audits of programs funded by the Recovery Act because we are still learning how our governments will be affected. However, we anticipate that many of these high-profile programs are already an existing part of our audit plans. Additionally, most of our member organizations base their audit plans on risk analysis. Because federal funds carry inherent compliance risks, we anticipate that local governments and audit organizations will add audits of these projects to their plans. Most importantly, the large majority of ALGA members follow standards that require us to pursue potential fraud when we do conduct our audits. The final topic we were asked to address is the challenges we face in meeting our oversight obligations. While we recognize the potential benefits that the stimulus funds provide for our local economies, we do face three significant challenges. First, despite our efforts, we estimate that fewer than 20% of the nation's larger cities and counties have an independent audit function. If I could offer one suggestion to improve accountability nationwide, it would be that you craft a way to encourage more local jurisdictions to create audit functions. Ultimately, every taxpayer would benefit with better oversight of federal dollars spent at the local level. The second challenge is resources. The majority of our local government audit organizations are very small in comparison to the audit resources that we audit. 1/3 of our members have only 1 or 2 staff. Finally, most local governments have experienced budget reductions in the current economic downturn. Many of our member organizations have cut positions or implemented furloughs. But let me close by saying that despite these challenges, we welcome the opportunity to work closely with the GAO, with the Inspector General community, and with state auditors to provide oversight of local government's use of the federal stimulus funds. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Jerry Brito, and I'm a senior research fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University and an adjunct professor of law at George Mason University School of Law. I want to thank you for inviting me to testify on preventing stimulus waste and fraud. This committee knows why it's so important to keep close tabs on the nearly $800 billion of spending contained in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. The question is, how do we do it? Dozens of inspectors general and official auditors around the country will follow the stimulus money. They will do commendable work, but they can't possibly look at every payment and every transaction. While we might want to, we can't hire an army of auditors charged with tracking every single dollar. However, we can supplement a very small number of professional auditors with a very large number of small contributions from citizens. That is, we can crowdsource accountability the same way that Wikipedia crowdsources the writing of an encyclopedia. In fact, this very testimony that I'm reading was crowdsourced. I published a draft of it on a wiki webpage and alerted other transparency enthusiasts and academics of its existence. In the 24 hours that the wiki was online, over a dozen persons made edits and additions to these words, all of them adding value. If the government requires clear, timely, and profound reporting of how every dollar is spent, everyone, not just government auditors, could keep track of the money. Millions of citizens around the country could be able to look at the transactions related to recovery-funded projects in their neighborhoods. How would government enlist the help of citizens to keep recovery spending accountable? It doesn't have to. It just has to provide the data. If the government makes the raw spending data available, a strong community of transparency enthusiasts and scholars will build tools that allow citizens to sift, sort, and report it. There doesn't have to be just one recovery.gov. If we make the data available, citizens can take that data and make many recovery.govs with different focuses and different sort of presentations of the data. Earlier this year, I launched the website stimuluswatch.org with the help of two very talented volunteer software developers, Peter Snyder and Kevin Dwyer. The site presents nearly 20,000 shovel-ready projects that the U.S. Conference of Mayors reported as candidates for stimulus funding. Citizens can easily find a list of projects in their hometown and then rate, discuss, and add factual context to each project. Now that you have passed the Recovery Act, we want to expand the capabilities of our website to allow citizens to track the projects that will be funded in their communities. I know that other web developers would like to make similar tools, including applications that track job creation and to plot stimulus dollars on maps coded with unemployment and other statistics. There is no limit to the number of useful and innovative presentations that public-minded netizens can create. However, before we can make useful tools for the American public, the community of transparency innovators needs the raw spending data in full. To make sure we have that, we need you to clarify and strengthen existing data disclosure requirements. There are two key issues that need clarification that I'd like to bring to your attention today: the depth of disclosure and standardization. First is the question of how deeply disclosure will go. While the Recovery Act requires that recipients of federal stimulus funds report to the awarding agencies how the funds are spent, there is no clear instruction that every level of subcontract or subgrant must be disclosed. The OMB guidance interpreting the Act states that only the, quote, prime non-federal recipients of federal funding and the subawards made by these prime recipients are on the hook for reporting to recovery.gov. This is very troubling. If the government wants to ensure meaningful accountability, then we must have transparency at every level of transaction. It is not enough for citizens to know that the EPA made a grant to Florida, which in turn made a subgrant to Miami, where I'm from. We also need to know that Miami made a payment to Acme Concrete, which a citizen with local knowledge could recognize and flag as a firm owned by the council member's son-in-law. Right now, it is not clear we will get this information. The second key issue is standardization. At this point, the OMB guidance does not explain what data elements we should expect recovery.gov to publish. By data elements, I mean such things as project name, contractor, amount spent, purpose of the project, jobs created, street address, city, state, etc. If you think of the raw data as a spreadsheet, we would like to know what the column headers will be. We also don't know in what format the information will be presented. As I explained more thoroughly in my written testimony, ideally the data would be published in a structured format such as extensible markup language, known as XML. In his first day in office, the President signed a memorandum on transparency and open government. The three central themes of the memorandum to which the President committed the administration are transparency, participation, and collaboration. A community of interested and knowledgeable parties wants to participate and collaborate with the government to make online disclosure of recovery spending data succeed. For example, a wide range of groups and individuals from all parts of the political spectrum have formed a coalition for an accountable recovery, and I commend you and the administration, the coalition's vision statement and proposed online transparency architecture, which I have attached to my written testimony. I'm happy to report that so far the administration has been quite good at listening to suggestions from those of us who are interested in recovery data. Unfortunately, it has not been as good at sharing information in return, a necessity in true collaboration. Ideally, the folks building recovery.gov would be allowed to talk with us so we can learn what they are planning and we can tell them what we'd like to see included. We're willing to help track the stimulus money and take part of the responsibility for seeing it well spent, but to do so, we need the data. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me thank all of you for your testimony. Let me begin with you, Mr. Brito, when you just finished up. I'll come right back to you.
Yes.
Would you agree that technology is not a barrier to solving problems?
It's not a barrier to solving the problems? No. I mean, it is a barrier to the extent that there are legacy systems in place in government and at the state level that might not be quite at the speed that need to be to report the data. To that extent, it could be a barrier, but it's a barrier that could be overcome.
Right. You know, let me put this to you, Mr. Holland, Mr. Hare, and also Mr. Gregan. As you may know, there are strong provisions in the Recovery Act protecting state, local, and contractor employees that report fraud and waste in connection with stimulus spending. Do you have a broad plan on how to harness citizen and whistleblowers' involvement in keeping an eye on stimulus spending? Do you plan to publicize the new whistleblower protections in order to encourage whistleblowers to come forward? Let me just go down the road. Let me start with you, Mr. Holland. I'll start with you and then come down the line.
Mr. Chairman, I think that the best way to address the fraud and abuse that might occur is catch it before it begins, which is exactly what I said in my statement, and it's probably to rely more upon Mr. Gregan's people, the procurement officers, to go back and take a look at what we said in our single audits, where there were weaknesses in internal controls in procurement and in contracting policies, strengthen the procurement policies that might be out there to avoid any fraud and abuse that might take place. But as it does take place, auditors at the state level are always prepared to disclose any fraud, any abuse, any waste that they come across. Yeah. We do so already.
Right. Strengthen the procurement policies. What does that really mean?
I think it means really the policies generally, as I mentioned in my oral remarks, are in place. They need to be reemphasized. People need to be, in many cases, trained again on the meaning of those policies. I would suggest to your specific question, Mr. Chairman, that we have whistleblower protections in place. I think we have very good ones in the city of Washington, D.C. and the other two very large governments that I've had the privilege of being an official in. I would say we need to reemphasize them. As we try now, one of our greatest antiseptics to anything going wrong here is just massive communications, whether it's by website, some of the things Mr. Brito said, and many others of us have said. Let's communicate more aggressively. Let's make it so easy for any interested member, whether it's the public or the press or any oversight function that has a direct role in the process of overseeing the expenditure of funds. Let's make it ultra easy for them to see where every dollar goes, and not only that, to inquire as to the legitimacy of any expenditure. So I think now is as good a time as any, a better time probably than most, to reemphasize those whistleblower protections that I think we do have in place.
Right. You think it's easier now to do it with Devaney coming in the picture? Or does that make it more difficult?
I don't, I'll be honest with you, I don't know the specifics of exactly how these roles are going to hash out. I think the idea of putting an organization in place to be responsible as a single point of information, if you will, a single point of truth, I'll call it, because I love that phrase. I think that's the right idea. So, and we've got to make it work.
Right. Mr. Hare.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree that this is a time to reinforce existing practices of dealing with whistleblowers, but I would also suggest that it's a time for local governments to maybe think about starting up hotlines and providing whistleblower protections through their local legislation. We started our hotline in 1994. We were not the first, but there are a lot of governments that just have started very recently bringing up hotlines at the local level. The city of Milwaukee's is only a couple of years old. The state of Wisconsin just put theirs up last year. And if you're going to take information from people alleging fraud, you need to have a well-positioned whistleblower protection. So I think that we will use this opportunity to try and reinforce and expand the use of hotlines at the local government level.
You know, one of the things that's been talked about a great deal is the inability to communicate. And of course, you know, I suggested to the vice president to call in and have a summit to see in terms of from a technology standpoint to see if we can't sort of have everybody on the same page, you know, and of course, I'm being discouraged at the fact that they're saying that I'm being unrealistic. I mean, these are coming from professionals. I mean, to the point where, you know, I'm saying, you know, why can't we do this? I'd like to just sort of get some opinions on it. Mr. Brito, you touched upon it earlier. You know, what do you think would stop us from doing it? You know,
Well, I mean, like I said, I mean, there are going to be some legacy systems, and by that I mean old computers that that don't have the capability to produce the sort of data formats that we need. But aside from that, and I think that you can get the data out in a useful enough format that others can take and aggregate and make it useful on recovery.gov and other websites. So I guess to answer your question directly, no, technology should not stop us, right? This is an unprecedented amount of money that we're spending. It's the American people's money, and they have a right to know how it's being spent. And the best whistleblowers are the folks who don't know they're whistleblowers, right? If they can go online, look up the projects that are in their neighborhoods and say, boy, I know something about this project, that's what's important.
any other comments before I yield to my?
I would add to this that at the federal level, rightfully so, you talk in trillions and billions. At the state level, we talk in billions and millions. At Jerry's level, they talk in millions and thousands. When we start inputting that information at the millions and thousands level across the country, with lots of different people having responsibility for inputting that data and deciding what is a job created, what is not a job created. And it may be different in Springfield, Illinois versus Brooklyn. It may be different in Miami or in Chicago. It's going to be different all over the place. It's a very complex issue and lots of bits of information that at some point you're going to want to look at and say, it all is the same. And that is a challenge before us, to create all that information the same across the country so that the proper analysis can be done. And it is not an easy job to do. And I caution you to have a realistic approach, that when you start thinking about the people are going to put it in. The people are going to say, this is the spending for this 2-week period. It's going to vary all over the country. It is a real challenge at the grassroots data entry level. And ultimately it's going to get to you, but you want it to be right.
Yeah, but you know, the reason I'm so concerned is that, you know, everybody's saying that $55 billion will be wasted if we are not careful. And of course, that to me is very disturbing. You know, that's B as in boy, 55 billion. You know, that's a lot of money. And I feel that we could do a lot of things with that money. If it's wasted, then, you know, I think that we're not doing the American public, you know, the service that we're supposed to be providing if we're allowing $55 billion to go out the back door, side door, whatever door. You know, so I think that's a real concern. So I think it's an issue that we need to continue to talk about. I yield now to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first go over and say, Mr. Holland, I want to just say, you know, from where you come from, the job you've done in the past, you're the meanest SOB I think that has ever counted beans. So I want to appreciate that. And the challenges in D.C. Astonish me. As a former mayor, I would love to have a shot at this city for a few years, but real challenges there. I got a question for you. When we were bringing this bill up, there was a discussion about putting conditions in so we made sure we direct these funds in a certain way. And in fact, the senators kept wanting to strike some of the guidelines because they said, don't worry, this is a general, we have oversight. How far does this, the oversight and our hands-on ability go, I guess the way to explain it is, when the federal government contracts with somebody to do a project, we have direct oversight, the administration has direct oversight, there is a contractual relationship. When it goes through the state and then through down to the city and the county, is that contractual relationship broken? Or does the contract or implied contractual relationship follow the money as it's going through, and thus the accountability follows the money as it goes through? Or is the nexus separated at the state line, and we are now at a whole different relationship, that our ability to hold a contractor on at the city accountable has been broken because we went through that system?
Well, I think, if I can jump to what I think the answer you might be looking for is that under the Single Audit Act, when that money comes to the state and it's that federal program's being spent, and there's, who's responsible for that accountability? At the state level, that's me. At the city level, that's Jerry. So that accountability, that single audit, that tracking that federal funds, and with regard to the stimulus money, it is our understanding that the vast majority of the stimulus money will go through existing federal programs, which means to say we will be responsible under those existing programs and that existing single audit program for the accountability of those funds. Does that get that question?
But does let's just say if you do it through a city program, let's just say we're building, construction. We have standards that are on the books and are coming onto the books that are a federal minimum for every contractor. When you accept those funds, is there an implied contract that you are now a contractor and fall under that? You have to live like you do other guys, or are you exempt from that to where you don't have to follow the same rules as somebody who is a private sector contractor with the federal government?
Mr. Chairman, in my experience, when we audit that dollar spent at the contractor or subcontractor level, we audit against the criteria that is established at whatever point upstream we got the money from, whether it's the state or federal government. So if you've got restrictions on those funds as to how they must be spent, those attach to our audit program, and we follow through on those restrictions.
Okay, because let me just be very frank. There was a real concern here that we make sure that when we create jobs, we create legal jobs. We're not going to have hundreds of thousands of people that are illegal, using false documents, false Social Securities, getting this job. There were senators that said the condition that we put on at the House to require E-Verify was repetitive because the administration was now going to require, as of March, that all federal contractors had to use E-Verify. The question is this, is it understood that part of the fraud and abuse part of this is that when you hire somebody under this fund, you're going to make sure that their Social Security, they are who they claim to be, and that they're qualified under federal law to work legally in this country. The big question is, does that requirement that this administration is going to apply to federal contractors, will that be followed? Will that follow the money all the way down to the local level?
Well, we would hope that would be done at the front end, where the people who were responsible for administering that program would follow the law. And then if that is the law, if that's a provision within that contractual arrangement, that would be subject to audit by either a state auditor or a local auditor.
I would agree with that, Mr. Chairman.
So in other words, what you're going to look for is specific language in the grant or in the text of the grant, rather than the general policy of the federal government. You need that specifically stated. Because I'm wondering here, because there's all kinds of fraud and abuse that I don't think is specifically stated, that you will de facto pick up, that I don't know about nepotism, I don't know about what kind of conflict of interest, and I assume in a lot of those contracts they're there, but there's a lot of this that I hope that you maintain as a standard that isn't specifically referred to in the grant, but is sort of a common sense approach, that you're not going to give this money to somebody or some group that's in violation of the law. But the big question is, will that apply also to this segment that the House we overwhelmingly put into our bill, that let's make sure that the only people that get the jobs or get these grants are people who are legally in the country by requiring E-Verify to be used?
I can't speak to any specific program at this particular point, not knowing what's in each specific program, but if there are those restrictions, we will audit against those restrictions.
Yes, sir.
I mean, I can't speak directly to what the requirements are on these gentlemen right now, but they all seem to agree that they have, they're accountable for how the money is spent, and they're in charge of making sure that the money is spent accountably, right? What I'd like to know, and what I'd like to suggest is important as well as accountability from the IG level, is reporting. And so the question for me would be, does the fact that the money goes from the federal government to the state, to the city, does that still carry a reporting requirement where the city must report what were the contracts that were made, who was paid, what for, and then any sort of interest that you might have about how the money is being spent, a citizen in that locality can look at that contract and maybe raise a red flag directly.
Yeah, because one of the things you do is somebody says, oh, I hired this many people, and if you don't check that the Social Security number and name is actually viable, they could put any person they want, but there's no way for us to audit the books if there isn't that data available, and that data, the way you get that data available is through E-Verify. You actually, go in Social Security and says, okay, this guy says it's his name, this is number, and you match it up, and that allows auditors to say, yes, this was really a person, and we can verify that because here's the number, here's the name, and it's been checked.
That should be done by the people who are running the program at the front end. Your goal should be never to see me again
and
as an auditor, because things have been done right.
Okay. I know, Mr. Chairman, I apologize, but there's one issue that the reference to the recovery.gov being not being up and going for another year. Somebody want to comment on that, Mr. Brito?
Yeah, I think that would be a real shame. I mean, if the money's being spent now, we need folks looking at the dollars being spent now to flag anything that might be inappropriate or might be wasteful. And this isn't just about gotcha games, right?
That's what we want to avoid is gotcha games.
It is not about gotcha games. It's about performance, really, in large part. And citizens on the ground are the best placed to be able to communicate to folks in their own local government, in their state government, to you, that the project that's going down in their neighborhood, maybe it's a community center, maybe it's a bridge, that is not going very well, right? Maybe they can't get a job there, even though there's supposed to be this many jobs available. And the only way that you allow them to know what's going on is by releasing the data as soon as possible online. And I understand Mr. Devaney is facing many challenges, least of which is taking over the site now after 30 days. But I think they need to make that a top priority because that would mean enlisting millions of auditors, which are called the American people.
And the chairman really has tried to make this get away from the gotcha game, get to avoid the problem to start with, and if the problem shows up, address it while it's small. Don't wait. And what I worry about with this item is we won't know for a year, and that could be enough time for real problems, and then it ends up being a big blow up rather than a little problem we can address. Anybody else want to comment on that 1 year timeline problem?
I would agree. That's an excessively long period of time for us to start getting data. If we're going to have to wait that long, we'll probably rely on other resources so we can share information in the audit community and get ahead of problems and not wait that long to find them.
I just want to follow up on this, Mr. Chairman, because I think this is really shows what we've done in the past in the federal government. And if we're going to change the outcome, we now change the process. And I think this is one place Republicans and Democrats ought to be working together to help to keep this administration out of the gotcha game by us actually saying we need you to do we need you to do the right thing first so we avoid having to point out that you did something wrong after the fact. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that transparency is very, very important, and this is what we're really talking about. And I think that any way that we can do that, I think that it's just so important because $787 billion is a lot of money, and that we need to try to make certain that it is being spent properly. At this time, I yield to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brito,
yeah.
We've been throughout the day concerned, and I'd like your view on the fact that apparently it's going to take an estimated year for recovery.gov to get to a level of transparency. Can you take us through how we can reduce that down to an acceptable, well, down to as close as possible an acceptable level to get transparency through the entire process available to either search engines or the public?
I think that OMB, or now it seems that Mr. Devaney is taking over the website, so it will be the Recovery, Accountability, and Transparency Board, needs to issue guidance, and I would hope that my colleagues up here can answer this as well, could issue guidance, maybe after some collaboration where these guidance is developed, basically issue guidance that will tell cities, contractors, those who would actually be receiving monies and would have to be on the hook for reporting, what they need to report. And so that we in the transparency community can know what we can expect coming down the pike. And I'm talking about what fields need to be added, which is what, the name of the contractor, the cost, number of jobs created, et
So you're
cetera.
saying they've got to define, somebody at the government side has to define the fields so that when you answer the question, you put them into fields that are consistent so they can be searched.
Consistently across the country. And I want to emphasize that I hope this is done in collaboration with the folks on the ground in the cities, the folks in the transparency community who are interested in receiving the data and using it. So that's the first thing. The other thing is something that you've all been doing here today, which is sort of clarifying how deep will the reporting go. Because you need to clarify that it's going to go down to the ultimate terminal user of the money, that they will be as on the hook as anybody else.
And as you've gone through the legislation, would it be correct to say that nowhere in there does it either provide for or require that there be reporting down to the contractor and subcontractor, nor is there authority for those rules to be created?
I think that would be correct as far as saying that there's nowhere in the Act that it specifically says that all contractors and subcontractors or subgrantees, et cetera, are on the hook for reporting. I'm not sure, neither does it prohibit it, right? So I'm not sure that authority is required. Maybe this is something that OMB could require on its own. I'm not sure.
Okay, so I think, Mr. Chairman, that's probably the one point we've gotten between Mr. Devaney and here, and I'd like to get responses from the others, is that we don't have a clear answer to whether or not they will require it and that they believe they have the rulemaking authority. I believe they do, by the way. I think by being silent on it, they do have the authority, but that may be one for us to jointly ask the entire organization headed by the Vice President about whether they intend to have those rules and whether they need any further action from us, and that may be our best joint follow-up.
I have no objections to that at all.
Okay, I look forward to working something out with our staffs. And for the others, I'd appreciate this sort of your further belief on that point, because to me, this oversight, which is proactive, which I'm very proud the chairman has done it on this basis, only is some good if we look for these things that we need to do now before those databases are created, filled with material that's hard to read. Please.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree that the sooner those decisions are made, the better for all of us who are going to be involved in reporting and auditing. We need you to be clear about what you want and communicate that to us. It may involve the need for some further coordination with training or some other type of cooperation, but the sooner you can identify what you want us to provide, the better. We are used to juggling our systems with federal systems. We have a separate system for reporting with HUD. We have a separate system for reporting transportation funding. We find a way to integrate that with our own system so we can be as efficient and accurate as possible, but we need to know what you want.
I would like to add, first of all, I consider, and I think it's important to register this, the procurement community in the public sector is part of the transparency community, and I want to make sure that we all understand, in my profession, and certainly our partners in the U.S. Congress, that we definitely consider ourselves part of that community. But it's a well-intended plan right now, but not yet well executed, and this is what most concerns me. If this does not flow down from the top, what you have in an attempt to be transparent is 50 different state websites and probably 3,066 county websites and 70,000 cities and town websites, all of whom somewhere are in that chain of expenditure flowing down from this great act. But you don't have transparency. What you have is an impenetrable morass. Any of us who've ever tried to even figure out how 50 states do business would find that a challenge, because there is no single form in which we find the data. So I think I could talk forever on it, but I would only belabor what we all already know and what we've already said.
Mr. Holland, if you have something in closing.
Mr. Gregan is right on. There is just the volume of information that's out there. It's going to make it very important for us to get clear guidance, clear, consistent guidance at the state level to those receiving agencies and those governors to make sure that they're collecting the exact same information across the board, and it's filtered back up to the federal level in a consistent manner.
Now, just one follow-up yes or no question, if I could, Mr. Chairman. You know, the interesting thing is we're holding this specifically on $800 billion, nominally $800 billion worth of special funding. Is there any reason in the world that whatever we do here should not be the model for what we do on a consistent basis with all dollars the federal government sends out?
I'd like to comment on that, if I may. My greatest hope, this is great, this is challenging for all of us, I think. This is very much challenging for my partners to my left and right here at this table and everyone else involved, including and maybe especially Mr. Devaney and his team. But there are great opportunities here, and one is that this will force us, this will catalyze, I think, changes that have long needed to be made with respect to automatically posting every contractual transaction in governments to the web. It's public information, why not? Why would we not do that? Why would we wait for a Freedom of Information Act to do what anyone might be interested in the public? More importantly, for me as a procurement professional, not all of us have the ability to administer contracts well. We spend all of our time going to the next contract and putting contracts in place. When contract administration, that part where you assure you're being delivered what you ordered, whether it's a good or service, is one of the most important areas where fraud can occur and where money can leak. We need to have contract administration as part of our profession, coast to coast. And on top of that, internal audit. It's wonderful to get annual audits from the Inspector General. It's great to get CAFR audits and other audits. It's even better for me to be ahead, to have an internal audit capability, procurement professionals that I can have help me manage the delegated authority that flows through the law of agency from the chief executive, the mayor of Washington, D.C., in my case, through the people that I trust to spend public money. So I'm hoping that this whole thing is really a catalyst for some fundamental and foundational changes to your question, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think we've really, the end has been the best part of the whole hearing, so thank you.
Right. Because you were part of that. Now, let me, first of all, let me thank all of the witnesses and members, who attended the hearing today. Before we adjourn, let me state that America demands that all stakeholders under the Recovery Act work in good faith to protect the public's interests and safeguard our unprecedented investment in America's future. I want to make it crystal clear that this committee will be watching and working feverishly to ensure accountability and transparency over these funds. Let me also thank the ranking member, Mr. Issa, for his leadership in standing up with me to demand the strictest oversight. I understand that the minority and majority staff worked on this hearing in a bipartisan manner, and that's the way it should be. And I look forward to continuing in this spirit of cooperation. Finally, please let me, the record demonstrate my submission of a binder with documents relating to this hearing. Without objection, I enter this binder into the committee's record. And without objection, the committee stands adjourned, and thank you again for coming.
Thank you.
Adjourned.